In the first gospel, we hear the story of the Transfiguration. Jesus takes James and Peter and John, three of the closest disciples, and invites them up onto the highest mountain. I mentioned we think that's Mount Tabor in the lower Galilee region of Israel. And it stands out oddly amidst the flat plain, one big hill in the midst of all of it. I'm going to make sure we're all muted here. There we go. It stands out as an oddity, this mountain, and that's the mountain that Jesus brings Peter and James and John up, and it's quite a hike. And there on that mountain, we can imagine the three disciples and Jesus being all out of breath. And then what happens next is something that there's no other word for than to say transfiguration, transfigured. His entire being was changed before them. Mark, but many of the other gospels, they tell the story that Jesus began to glow a kind of white. The vestments, the clothing he was wearing was so white that no bleach could have ever created anything like that. So we can imagine Jesus as something radiating, a light radiating. And there, appearing next to Jesus, is Moses and Elijah, the two forbearing prophets, the two who led the people of Israel through their great history up until this point. And Jesus is there with Moses and Elijah, communing with them. These are the texts behind the readings that you just read. The hymns that we just sang, Christ upon the mountain peak, Moses and Elijah, all three of them. It's this incredible, surreal, unearthly moment. Enter Peter. What does Peter do? There's a reason why I love Peter so much. Peter is witnessing the glory of God, glowing, radiating like no other, like no one has ever seen it. It's as if the curtain between this world and the celestial world, the divine, has been pulled back. And Peter, of all people, Peter, this fisherman in the Galilee, he is able to peek in and see the divine. And what does he say? Oh, okay, I'll take it from here. Master, it is good for us to be here. Let's start building something. Let's build 3 booths. We'll make one for Moses and Elijah and you, of course. And then the idea behind this, of course, is that the 3 of you would stay up here. You'd stay up here on this mountain with me and James and John, and the 3 of us would hang out with the 3 of you, and we would be together, the 6 of us up here forever. Let's get to work. Let's build something permanent, because this is going to be forever. We'll go down, we'll go get food on occasion, we'll bring it up. I don't know, do you need food? Is Moses hungry? Is Elijah thirsty? I don't know how this works. We'll figure it out. Point is, you stay here and you'll be just for us. It's such a bold move on Peter's part that for only the second time, we hear a voice beaming through the clouds, as if God the Father is intervening in the moment, as if all of this has been broken by Peter's interruption. And the voice says, "This is my son, my beloved. Listen to him." Wonderfully, the images of this story in iconography often depict Jesus glowing, this remarkable hue and halo around him. And Moses and Elijah, they're all a few feet off the ground. And then Peter and James and John are often depicted below that. And what's wonderful is they look like turtles on their back with their feet in the air. They're just so overwhelmed by the moment. That's all they can do, is just stand there on their backs with their hands and feet in the air. They're moved by the voice of God. This is my son, my beloved. Listen to him. And the glory of God that we see transfigured in the person of Jesus of Nazareth is no longer contained in 3 dwellings on Mount Tabor, but becomes the glory for all of us to hope for, that someday we will see, and which is promised to us, and we will see. It won't be for Peter and James and John alone. The second story is of our saint that we remember this day, Blessed Absalom Jones. If you were to read a very short bio, you would see that Blessed Absalom Jones was the first African-American priest ordained in the Episcopal Church. Okay. But there is so much more behind that, which there should be. Absalom Jones was born in 1746 in Delaware. He was a slave. He was born into slavery, a child. But his slave master, Abraham Wynkoop, noticed something unique about this child. Noticed that a child that had very little access to written word sure seemed to be teaching himself a fair amount of it. And so Abraham afforded him the opportunity to read a Bible and kind of a grammar book, and that was about it. And here this child, no short of 10, was teaching himself to read. Teaching himself to read. Can you imagine how hard that is? Have any of you tried to pick up a foreign language this year in the midst of a pandemic? How has that gone? How many apps have you downloaded? I'm 2 in, and I haven't improved any. But here he is, Absalom, learning this on his own. Abraham, the slave master, dies in 1753. And by 1755, the plantation is handed over to his son, Benjamin. Benjamin does not want to be the owner of the plantation in Delaware. He has different vision for his life. So he sells the plantation off. And this is where our hearts should break a little. Because Benjamin, in selling the plantation off, decides there is promise in this young Absalom, so he will keep him, but he will separate Absalom from his siblings and from his mother and his father. He will sell them off, and they will become the property of other people. And Absalom would never see his mother or his father or his brothers and sisters again. Such was the fate of that brilliant 11-year-old boy. Benjamin moved to Philadelphia, and he set up shop as a shopkeeper near St. Peter's Church. This is where our history begins to should tickle your ears a little bit. Historic St. Peter's Church in downtown Philadelphia in Center City. They attend St. Peter's, and Absalom meets a girl there. He meets Mary, and the two eventually are married. They're married at Christ Church, Philadelphia, historic Christ Church. And so Absalom and his new wife, Mary, they are still within the bonds of slavery. But Absalom sets out. He has been doing night classes. Benjamin has allowed him to do that. So Absalom has been studying at night through a Quaker network. And the Quakers, in their great generosity, begin to raise money for Absalom so that he can buy his wife's freedom. So that he could buy his wife's freedom. And he does. He raises enough money. He raises enough money to buy himself too, but Benjamin doesn't want to let him go. You see, Benjamin realizes that as long as he is the owner of Absalom, then not only does he own Absalom as a person, but he also owns all the money that Absalom is raising for Mary's freedom. So he doesn't want to let this go. What benefit is there for him? But in 1784, Absalom is now 38. Benjamin relents and gives him his freedom. And Absalom actually continues to work for him as a paid employee of the shop that Benjamin had set up in 1755. Next, sorry, I heard a knock on the door. We have folks in the building. Absalom gets his freedom in 1784. All right, that's where we were. He decides at this point it's time to leave St. Peter's Church. It's a little odd now, having been a slave, but now being free. This is about the same time that he also meets a man named Richard Allen, and the two of them become lifelong friends. And so Richard invites him to begin attending St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church. And so they do. Richard and Absalom and their families begin to attend St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church. And they also set up in 1787 an organization that becomes the Free African Society. And it's this organization that's going to help former slaves like them. It's going to help them find their way, transition into this new life. And so two things are going for him. Absalom is entrenched in St. George's, and his Free African Society organization is taking off. And they really sort of overlap quite a great deal. Many of the people who are part of the Free African Society are also members of St. George's. George's, so much so that St. George's is now growing. It's becoming a much bigger church than it was. And what did churches do that grow? They begin capital projects. And who's going to lead that effort? Well, it's Richard and it's Absalom. Most of the growth is their fault anyway. And so they set out to build a balcony in the church. That balcony would hold the overgrowth, the new growth in this church, sparked by the ministry of Richard and Absalom. And once the balcony was finished, you can imagine how the plot goes from here. One Sunday, everyone came in, as it had been, a mix of freed African Americans and the white folks in Philadelphia, all together until that one Sunday when they said, this balcony, we built that for you. You raise money for that, for yourself, because that's where you're going to go now. You thought you were raising money to benefit the whole church. You didn't realize that you were raising money for us to separate you and to put you up there in the balcony away from the rest of us. They walked out en masse, all of them. All the freed African members of that church, they all walked out on Sunday. And they never looked back. From then on, the Free African Society begins to create its own church family, if you would. Most of the folks who leave St. George's begin to worship together. And in 1794, that church becomes admitted as the St. Thomas African Episcopal Church, which, if you know this, is now located on the corner of Lancaster Avenue and City Line Avenue. It's a spectacular church. It's the oldest African Episcopal church in our denomination, and probably its largest, and one of my most favorite places in our diocese. It's phenomenal. They set that church up, and they asked the bishop of the Diocese of Pennsylvania, three things. We want to be admitted as an organized body. We want to have authority over our local affairs. We don't want to be dictated to. We want to be able to be a parish just like all the other parishes. And, Bishop, if you see it prudent, we would ask that you would consider Absalom for ordination. And in 1805, Absalom Jones becomes the first African-American priest in the Episcopal Church. It's a remarkable story. What comes next is also remarkable. The church, St. Thomas, it grows phenomenally. 500 new families in 1 year. Yeah, I saw a few of you go, whoo. 500 new families in 1 year. And Absalom is known for his preaching. And his central message was about the importance of liberation. That you cannot hold the love of Jesus of Nazareth and enslave people and own people. You cannot love them and control them. And it was a hard message, but he kept at it until he died. Such was the story of Absalom Jones. There's a commonality between both of these stories, the Transfiguration and the story of St. Absalom. Both involve the work of God. God is at work. God is moving, changing things. And they involve the containment of that effort. An effort by humans, by you and me, people like us, to try to put a framework around that. And in so doing, try to contain the work of the Spirit, to contain holiness. The first, I might say, was well-meaning. Peter wasn't out to defeat Jesus and bring Moses and Elijah down. No, it was Peter's exuberance that said, let's figure out a way to contain this, to make this just ours forever. I wouldn't say that Absalom's journey was well-meaning, but I would say that it wasn't. It was the way things were. All the hurdles that Absalom experiences from his birth, well, that's just the way things are. But as we heard yesterday at the Absalom Jones diocesan service, our guest preacher was the Right Reverend Carly Hughes of the Diocese of Newark. She said the best thing. She said, just because the plan doesn't work out doesn't mean the vision is wrong. Just because the plan doesn't work out doesn't mean the vision was wrong. Jesus and his Father peeking through the clouds, well, they put Peter in his place. Absalom doesn't have a single moment that does that, but he has a whole lifetime of pushing back on a world that tried to contain the work of the Spirit within him. Very easily, it could have been that Abraham said, yes, I see the brilliance in this boy, but he shouldn't learn how to read. He'll become dangerous. But yet he did. He persisted time and time again, and we remember that. So I leave you with 3 questions this day. When has God stirred up your heart? When have you heard the work of the Spirit in you, and you have felt the pressure, a world around you that seeks to contain the work of the Spirit within you? I bet each of you has such a moment. Go to that place. Stay there for a second. What did that feel like? What did it feel like to hear God calling you to your brilliance, and knowing that such brilliance would get you in trouble? It'd take away opportunities. Maybe it would break apart community. Maybe it would, well, we can think of a million things, can't we? Then the second question. When have you participated in the containment of the Spirit in others? Oof. If nothing comes to mind for the first question, each of us has something to offer for the second. What systems did you participate in? What ideas did you endorse? What times have you said, well, that's just the way things are? Name those 2. Go to those places. Dare I say, how are we doing all that now? Who are those out there that God is stirring up? And we're saying, not yet, not yet. Too much. Don't push it so far. Then the third question. How then, now that we've identified that feeling and that we've identified the work that we have participated in to contain the brilliance and work of God of others, how do we loosen those chains? How do we let the Spirit work unbridled within those people that we now see? I believe, friends, that is the work of the church. It was when Bishop William White ordained Absalom Jones. Gosh, you can imagine the inbox that William White would have had after that, huh? It was when Absalom continued to preach about the sin of slavery. I can imagine a lot of folks told him, Absalom, you're pushing the envelope. You're getting political. This is a political issue. Don't push it too far. Just because the vision was wrong. The plan didn't work out doesn't mean the vision was wrong. In the end, friends, I think our job is not only to name the love of God at work in our lives and to love God just as much as God loves us, or at least try to, but also to let love breathe, to let God's work occur. Maybe the best thing we can do today is not make things worse. Maybe the best thing we can do today is step back and let the Spirit move. Even if our instinct is like Peter, even if our instinct is like Abraham Wincope and his son Benjamin, or the people who ran St. George's, up to the balcony you go. Our calling is not only to accept God's love, but to let that love work in the world, to make that love move a little easier around us. When we do that, then we will realize how many more Absalom Joneses there are out there. And we'll have more feast days to celebrate them too.